Hi everyone, welcome back to Mastering Change. Today we're diving into a topic that often gets overlooked in conversations about trauma and mental health: nightmares.
Not just the scary dreams you might shake off in the morning, but the kind that keep coming back. The ones that leave you anxious, exhausted, or even afraid to fall asleep in the first place. Because for so many people, nightmares aren't just dreams. They're unprocessed trauma playing out in the middle of the night.
Our guest today is Dr. Justin Havens, a trauma specialist and the creator of the dream completion technique. He spent years studying how trauma shows up during sleep, and more importantly, how we can resolve it.
We talk about the science behind why nightmares happen, what they're trying to tell us, and how one night, literally one night, can start to shift things. Justin also shares how he's helping people around the world heal from decades of suffering, often without ever even stepping into a therapy room.
So if you've ever felt like your nights are just as hard as your days, or if you're supporting clients who struggle with their traumatic sleep disturbances, this one's for you. Here we go. Hello, Dr. Justin Havens. Welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here today. As we do with all of our podcasts, we'll just start with Araminta asking you a question from Esther Perel's card deck as a means of us just breaking the ice and getting to know you before delving into a conversation around your work and how that relates to the field of trauma, mental health and well-being.
Hi, welcome, Dr. Justin. So I have the cards here. I have no idea what the top one is. I'm going to pick it and read it, and away we will go. Okay, so the card says, "My inner critic loves to say ...
Gosh, well, this is being put on the spot, isn't it? Yeah, my inner critic probably would say, must do better, maybe. But I'm not going to, unless you want me to unpack the rest of that, which we could spend a podcast on, that's probably what it might be saying.
Unpack a little bit of it. I think it would be interesting to unpack must do better.
Well, I think that's kind of part of I mean, we've all got parts of ourselves that can be helpful, but also not so helpful. And probably, growing up and, doing a career in my 20s that was nothing to do with therapy. I think there was a sense of angst about all of that. I was reasonably successful in a whole load of fields, from the military, engineering, management consulting. But it kind of, that we all get led into psychology by our own psychology. And for me, that's kind of what happened too. So I'm a lot easier on myself now. So.
And so how did you get from those very diverse careers into kind of the work that you're doing now, which is around traumatic nightmares, really?
Well, I first kind of had an opportunity to do some psychotherapy training 2008. So I kind of would have been, I can't do the maths about how old I was, but I had the opportunity to do a small course, and then that kind of grew from there. And that really came from, again, my own interest. I think, had I had my time again, I might have done psychology as a degree, but I didn't. I did engineering and lots of other things. And so my own, some of my own personal struggles with maybe anxiety and mild depression all led to an interest in, well, what's going on within me, and how can I manage myself better. So the training was really interesting, and very early on, I got a sense of trauma as a fascinating subject, not just the trauma of combat veterans and people who've been abused, but actually just the lived experience of life and the micro traumas that we all experience and how it shapes us. I quite early on heard about this EMDR therapy, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I did that training quite early. There's something weird about the eye movement aspect that actually does create change from the inside out. And as I kind of got more into the field of trauma, the sense that nightmares are a really core symptom that aren't really addressed. They kind of almost treated as a consequence of the trauma and not addressed directly. And I was frankly looking for a PhD subject, and the nightmares, I realized nobody's done anything in the UK since 1978 or something. A psychiatrist had written a paper. Since then, absolutely nothing. if you went to the big kind of, and because of my military experience, I've got an interest in veterans and military mental health. The kind of the information that's available from the people like Combat Stress, 10 years ago was kind of very much, yeah, suck it up and we'll help you try and manage it. And I just knew there was a better way. Now, the interesting kind of segue from my work as a management consultant is all about making operations run better. What are the best methods of doing things? How do we know we're doing the best method? How do we monitor our performance? All of that I could put into the field of therapy, which isn't really traditionally a kind of therapist's bag so much. So when I learned EMDR, I thought, hey, this is a really good tool. And B, with some of my previous experience, I can optimize. Then I come across nightmares. Then I come across the work from someone in America. Then I do my PhD. And it's a progression of trying to find the most effective tools to relieve suffering. And as we go on to talk more about the resolution of nightmares, it's a fundamental aspect of PTSD. In fact, the presence of nightmares is the PTSD. It's the unprocessed trauma rattling around the unconscious mind. And when we focus on resolving nightmares, we can get an awful lot of symptom relief quite quickly. And again, thinking of biggest bang for the buck, that's good. If the level of trauma in society and across the world is humongous. And, not everyone can have 20 sessions of one-to-one EMDR therapy. So that's another factor. So it's just, I'm just quite passionate about it in a way I wasn't about management consultancy.
I can relate. In this pursuit of the most effective tool to relieve suffering, you've explained that nightmares was an area you identified there was kind of not been a lot of attention in that. So how would you explain what it is you want to share with a community of psychiatrists, psychotherapists, really curious, invested individuals who are coming to this podcast for, understanding new knowledge, new modalities, new ways of thinking? How do you describe your belief system, what you want to champion, your cause in the context of your educational journey so far?
Okay, that's lots of questions in one there. But I think fundamentally is to be interested in sleep and nightmares. And at the fundamental level, just ask your clients about it. And the second part is to know that whatever people are experiencing, whether it is a repetitive post-traumatic nightmare of an experience they've had, or whether it's just a very scary fictitious dream of bad, really, really bad things happening, or whether people can't remember anything at all, but they may be lashing out in their sleep or sweating or screaming or anything, that all of those things can actually be resolved very quickly in as little as 20 minutes. Coaching and education and one night can resolve that stuff. That's the fascinating bit. And so that's what I've tried to package up of in terms of people who are moderately familiar with the world of CBT and nightmares will know that there are a few forms of therapy that have been around 20, 30, 40 years called image rehearsal therapy, nightmare rescripting, a whole series of combinations and different things. And all I've done, I'm not claiming to be a kind of a complete innovator of just brand new stuff, but I'm taking the best of what's there and I'm combining it and trying to find the most effective tools, and then you try and prove that through science and research, to show that actually this stuff is, it's solvable. It's also possible to teach people these skills outside of the therapy environment. And that's one of my most recent endeavors, which is a website where people can access self-help resources, a series of videos and a workbook to teach themselves how to stop nightmares. And again, we can talk more about the detail of it, but the first thing I would say is pay attention to it, because the impact of nightmares is absolutely, key, because it can, sleep is so fundamental to our mental health, and nightmares probably the second biggest problem. I mean, insomnia, the ability to not get to sleep or maintain sleep, is the biggest sleep issue. That's fine. That's well understood. And there's quite a lot of, you've only got to put into Chat GPT, tell me how to cure my insomnia, and it will be pretty good. When it comes to nightmares, you stick that stuff in, and it's kind of do relaxation techniques, eat the right foods, do meditation, all stuff which is kind of, when you deal with someone who's had really severe post-traumatic nightmares, kind of doesn't touch the sides. So so there's such a lot to do in this space, and it's generally not addressed. And that's where, so the technique that I kind of call it's called the dream completion technique, and there are lots of reasons why I've called it that, and we can kind of get into more of the nitty gritty of it. But in essence, no one should have to suffer from nightmares, and when kind of 2 to 8% of the population do, that's a significant issue. But no one really thinks it's significant. No one goes to their GP and says, "I'm having terrible nightmares. I'm lashing out and hitting my wife in the night, and I'm punching holes in the wall, or I'm drinking a bottle of whiskey because I don't want to go to sleep." Those are the more serious end. But then just at a less serious end, you've got people who are kind of. I came across one 90-year-old chap. He'd had nightmares for 70 odd years since the invasion of Aden in 1964 or something like that. So these problems can really persist, and people just get used to it and don't do anything about it. And I'd like to kind of try and change that narrative and say, yeah, we can. No one should suffer
it's
from
interesting
nightmares.
because we've been talking quite a lot internally about sleep recently, and if you have an inherent fear of sleep because when you go to sleep you're going to have this experience, this nightmare, that's a problem. But there's also a lot of scrutiny on sleep at a societal level. It's almost like a social currency these days, how much sleep you've got, how consistent the consistency of your bedtime and your wake time.
Yeah.
Become common parlance to discuss sleep quality, particularly with a particular demographic. But
you thinking of the younger folk?
I think people in preventative health, lifestyle medicine, biothing, big subject in that space. I think there is a little bit more discussion around sleep, but it's more like I say, social currency, a badge of honor about how, we know there's a correlation between sleep and physical and mental health. But I do agree that when it comes to an issue like nightmares or, fear of, that isn't something socialized in a meaningful way. And really, when you say the word nightmares, I tend to go straight to children because it seems a developmental milestone, less than something I've ever heard anyone in adult life talking about.
Yes. But we just don't talk about it, and I don't fully understand it. I think it's because people just perceive that, well, nothing can be done about it. I think that really is the issue. That the kind of it is just. I've spoken to lots of GPs. They've never had anyone sit down in front of them saying, "I've got a problem with nightmares." They might say, "We've got a problem with PTSD." And then the nightmares would be a symptom. But then there are also plenty of people who have nightmares anyway. So I'm doing this research trial in an NHS service in Manchester, which is a primary care mental health service offering CBT, EMDR for common mental health issues, depression, anxiety, PTSD. And when we did the first initial screening, and they got a big waiting list of let's say it's 100 people, something like 40 or 50 of those people on the waiting list had at least one nightmare a week, which is something that you could actually tackle and have a meaningful impact very easily with very low cost in a group context even. But 50% of the waiting list had nightmares, and that's massive. And we're talking here mild to moderate symptoms, not secondary care. You go into a psychiatric facility and everyone's got sleep problems, and there's a whole spectrum of all sorts of different things going on there. But nightmares are a very common presentation with schizophrenia, psychosis, and all sorts of other things. So it's a big topic. And we're doing the proportion of people's life that are asleep and making sleep effective, as as you said, people are very aware of it. Ironically, all the fitness apps that kind of monitor your sleep, they're really kind of all dressed up and nowhere to go to a degree. I don't think they're very accurate. How much REM sleep you're getting, the degree of deep phase 4 sleep you're getting. But I'm not a sleep scientist. Interestingly, there are not many sleep clinics in the UK either, and they tend to deal with the more esoteric end of problems, narcolepsy and sleepwalking and REM sleep behavior. Not many, and they do treat nightmares, but it's not. But they haven't got a queue of people saying, help me.
And how can you mentioned 50% of people in the NHS trial that you're going to do in Manchester reporting nightmares once a week. How often do the people you see know that they are having traumatic nightmares, and is there or just normal nightmares, and is there a difference between traumatic nightmares and normal nightmares?
It's a really good question, and actually there isn't. They're all a representation of so we all dream for 2 hours every night in general, and we get that REM sleep, the rapid eye movement sleep, towards the latter end of our sleep. And the purpose of that is our dreaming mind is to kind of clean out, like a washing machine, the kind of emotionally laden material of the day. Or if for someone that had a traumatic experience, that it's still trying to clean that out. Now, the reason those nightmares may repeat is that there's just simply not enough internal resources, if you like, to make that process work. It's not getting to the end of the wash cycle, so to speak. So traumatic nightmares, I mean, this is interesting because I've done some work in Ukraine as well, training a whole bunch of Ukrainian therapists in this. And when they're working with someone, it wouldn't matter whether a bomb's landed on their house and killed someone or whether it hasn't. They may still have nightmares of the bomb landing on their house. And actually, the experience of that is very much the same when you're in the experience. Obviously, for the person that has had the bomb land on their house, when they wake up, they're faced with a reality that was the experience. But interestingly, the solution to both of those problems in terms of their nightmares is exactly the same. We're trying to encourage the brain to complete the dream and not wake the person up. And when they complete the dream, that's when the trauma symptoms go down and the sleep gets more peaceful. But there's not enough research on this either, really, in terms of, they're not very good population studies on nightmares. Nothing in this country at all. So it's a very interesting thing. There are quite a few different, you've got whether the nightmare is based on real material or fictitious material, and whether it's repeating or different. And you've got whole combinations of those. So it's not uncommon for people to have an amalgamated dream of several traumatic incidences all rolled into the one, culminating into a dream experience which is worse than what happened in reality. That's very common. But a key part of the technique that I've developed is changing the perspective of people away from one where, yes, it feels very real when you're in it. It's very out of control. It's very powerless, and it can result in, extreme things happening, torture, death, all sorts of stuff happens. But it's not real, and it's not. And it's that key change in perspective, which is the same change in perspective when you're dealing with trauma. Any trauma patient of mine that I work with, the key thing is we can't change the past, but it's how the past is represented within the person. That's what flashbacks are. That's what hyperarousal is. All the symptoms of PTSD are manifesting in the present, but we can't change the past. And it's exactly the same with nightmares in the way that they're manifesting in people's sleep. And all we need to do is to create the conditions of healing, and because dreaming is a healing process, we just need to give it an encouragement in the right direction, and it starts working wonderfully again. And that's the best bit. The 90-year-old guy, after one night, started sleeping properly and not having nightmares after one night. After 70 years of nightmares, he got better. And so it's fascinating how we heal.
So your modality doesn't draw a distinction between those repetitive nightmares, those scary fictitious nightmares, or those unconscious sleep disturbances. The process, the approach to reconciling that to get to a point where you can do the dream completion.
Yes.
The principle is the same regardless.
The principle is the same. The application can be slightly different. The principle behind it is we're introducing new material into our dreaming mind to bend the dream into a different direction and allow it to complete. So to give you an example, the example of people having, imagining bombs landing, not imagining, dreaming about bombs landing on their house and the horror and everything, their new dream idea, which is what they think about before they go to sleep. This is what I want to happen in my dream. The one that someone came up with is the bomb landing on Putin's bald head. Right? And I can see, there's an instant reaction within you. And it's that emotional reaction. Ideas get into dreams on the back of emotion. And that's the principle behind the dream completion technique, which took, some of these nightmare rescripting approaches to a much higher level in terms of outcomes and repeatability and guaranteed success. Is that if we get a really powerful idea, like, the idea of the bomb landing on Putin's bald head, that works really well. And everyone can create their own dream idea. I've got a library of different ideas that people have tried, but it's all sorts of stuff. And dreaming isn't the key thing. Is we have this change of perspective where we know that they are in it, although it doesn't feel like it at the time. The reality is they're in control of their dreams. It's their process. They can put whatever they want in it. They can deal with whatever bad thing is happening. Whatever the perpetrator's doing, I've had people go, well, I'm going to be 30 foot tall and they're 1 foot tall, they're a tiny little thing that I'm just going to squash into the ground. It's really interesting because we're engaging people's creative processes. And for children, it works really, really well, particularly for night terror type stuff. And we don't need to do too much work before the kind of our own sleeping mind gets the idea of what we're trying to do and goes, oh, yes, yeah, that's it. I should be sleeping through all of this. It's normal to sleep through all of this weird stuff going on in my mind. If we could plug an HDMI cable into our sleeping mind every night and watch what's going on, it'd be, oh, my Lord, look at that. 2 hours of this weird stuff going on.
And is that then? So
that's normal. That's normal.
Well, no, yeah, I get that very much from what you say. And because I'm one of those people that goes to sleep and very rarely knows that I'm alive until I wake up again. So I have no recollection of what's happened. So if I was going to have these, when you talked about these unconscious sleep disturbance where people are thrashing out, but they've got no recollection of it. So they're not coming through this. They've got no conscious memory of what the experience is.
Yeah.
Works the same way. You're just training the brain to still have that.
Yeah. So the thrashing around one is a really very common, or the screaming is also very common. Now, normally, when you actually understand someone's history, they probably were having the nightmares. As part of the healing journey, the actual dream content can recede, but the behavior remains. Very common with the military and police folk. And what we're doing then is we're creating a new dream idea based on how they're going to get rid of that sensation. Now, if you're lashing about, it kind of implies that you're probably fighting someone off. So if you want to fight someone off, well, who do you want to be? So I did this with somebody last week, and they clicked into the idea of being an MMA fighter, and they were having dreams of their boss their boss did humiliate them in front of other people. And in his dream, when he kind of realized, when I said, maybe your boss should be in the ring. And yeah, that's good. So then he imagined throwing, kind of being powerful and throwing this guy off. And then, sleep's got better. So it's really, really interesting how this stuff works for people sweating or getting very hot. Being in an ice cave, doing a snow angel, being in a wind tunnel, being in an ice pool.
How do you measure sleep quality? Because you said the sleep got better. Is that
right? Okay, so
you debunked kind of some of the wearable devices as a as a good predictor of sleep quality? How do you define that?
Okay, so we've got two things. One is obviously the report when he says my sleep got better, my partner's telling me I'm not thrashing about in the night, I'm not waking up in pools of sweat. That's obvious. But I've also developed a 6-item scale called the Nightmare Assessment Scale, which is Swansea University. We're just about to publish the paper, actually. And so, again, when I did my PhD, we need to monitor the severity and the frequency and the severity of the sleep experience with reference to nightmares. So that's why we developed it, because the stuff that was already there in academia it did one thing well or something else well, but not all of it in a brief self-report measure that could be used clinically. So we're using that measure for this Manchester trial, which has been going on two years now. And it's also, if you've the self-help program that's available at www.stopnightmares.org, it's actually got that I've got that as a quiz at the front of it. So it is accessible. And so, yeah, you can measure how, your score after 24, where it goes. The key thing, though, is also that we're looking for a permanent shift. We're not looking for just to improve things and then for it to go back. And that, again, means we're using this approach to retrain the brain to sleep through anything, essentially. I think the research will probably bear out that it's most effective when a therapist teaches technique and has follow-up one-to-one. The second most effective approach will probably be in a group context, and the third most effective will be as a self-help program. But anyway, yeah. But the key thing is there's nothing available. I mean, I would love to get to a place where GPs already prescribe insomnia apps to help people, and that some of the resources I've developed, that there's no reason why that couldn't be prescribed to people. I'm in the process of speaking to Combat Stress, who I did some training for probably 5 or 6 years ago in this, just to again bring it up, because it's such a key. It's something that you can change quite quickly. So why wouldn't we? And the evidence is looking good.
Yeah, I can see so many applications like employee assistance programs, those places where people can sort of self-select the content based on their own needs. And some of those areas. Interesting.
And long COVID, interestingly enough, I did a little poll and kind of 30%, this is from a very kind of anecdotal thing, but 30% of people with long COVID are suffering from nightmares. And when you read the long COVID literature, long COVID is a bit like kind of medically well, I get the right term, but it's a bit of a catch-all for lots of things. For some people, it can be like chronic fatigue. Other people, it can be more like anxiety and depression. Other people, it's a whole mishmash of different things. Anyway, so there's lots of applications. Intensive care units, often people come out of there with a lot of disturbing nightmares, because you've also thrown some heavy duty medication into the process, and a pretty bizarre, intense experience of being in a waking up in an intensive care unit, which could be pretty distressing in its own. So,
if I'm having a distressing dream, where something distressing is happening, as long as it completes in a less distressing way, then I won't wake up. Is that what is essentially happening, and I won't necessarily remember the nightmare?
Well, the first thing, so a nightmare is a deeply distressing dream that wakes you up. That's the first definition. So some people will have disturbing dreams. Like interestingly, the more I've been putting these resources together, I've been noticing my dreams a lot more. And, some of them being a little bit scary. Now, if it doesn't wake us up and we wake up naturally in the morning and go, oh, that's not great, then we could kind of think about it and reflect on it. And it's only an issue if the same thing happened again the next night. Or if you were having just disturbing dreams all the time, then this idea, and we haven't mentioned it yet, dream interpretation. Well, am I having this? What's going on? What am I afraid of? And you could do that work. But as soon as it starts waking you up, then it's far more direct. So the idea is we want everything to go back into your kind of, I use the metaphor of the washing machine. We want the washing machine, the stuff in the washing machine, we press go, it gets to the end of the cycle, happy days. We're not really aware of it. So it really depends on the severity of the, going from initially waking up in the morning going, that was a bit rough, through to being woken up in the night, through to being woken up all the time in the night, every night. So it's a real continuum.
I watch people, certainly my son, who seems when he's sleeping, then he might go through a little distressing period, but it won't. I think I just wanted to make sure that was.
And that's okay. That's okay. And the key thing is to not wake people up either. If they're in the middle of stuff, not to wake them up, because that doesn't help either.
Fascinating, because you can equip people with some knowledge to really help them help themselves, especially with the amount of time that people are waiting to access. Sleep is so profound in that context. It's just it feels like it's an underexplored subject matter in the context of our world anyway.
Yeah. And there are a couple of other interesting areas. One, for performance athletes, there's probably, people having failure dreams. So hurdlers dreaming of hitting hurdle. You can do work on those. But also for military people or people working in traumatic environments where they're exposed to trauma, you can use this as a preventative thing to educate them about what's going on and almost allow them to prepare themselves so that they'll be, you're inoculating against trauma, you're inoculating against PTSD to a degree. So it's fascinating area and under talked about in the UK particularly.
We always wrap up with a question that
not another card, I hope.
A good one though. It's obviously we've got such exaggerated and profound need in the world for global mental health and wellbeing interventions, this kind of global epidemic. If you had a single lever of change, what would that lever be? What would you do? What would be your number one thing to affect the change that we all need to see?
Well, the crass answer would be to teach everyone the dream completion technique, but in a more practical way. I don't know. I mean, I think it's got to start with education, and so it has to start at school. But yeah, I mean that's a kind of solve the world's problem question. I'm not sure I'm qualified to do that. But I do know we've got excellent tools and techniques with trauma, not just dream completion. EMDR, there's other things. There's some stuff called the flash technique, which I'd love to talk about. What the other area I'm in, where we new innovations in the field of using these techniques in crisis teams with people with suicidality. So there's so much good news, but then there's so much need. So I'm not sure I can really give you a proper answer to that. But I'm hopeful that and even on a one person level, when I'm working with a client, I've got someone at the moment with very severe trauma, it's the worst case I've ever dealt with. And, when we're getting there, the transformational change is unbelievable. And that really gives you hope to the one person level. But how can we do that for the world? Geez, that's a big question.
Well, I think we have to start. I think what you said is beautiful, because you start with an individual and you have hope, then that has the opportunity to change their relationship to others and community.
Yeah, for sure. But then on the practical level, we need tools and techniques which you can scale up in large numbers, and the one-to-one therapy model isn't going to cut it for the world. So that's, I do know a bit about it, I guess.
It's been a real pleasure to meet you, Dr. Justin. Thank you for making time to chat with us today.
Thank you so much for your time, Justin.
Great. Okay. Bye. Bye-bye.